Hello guys, we are back with another video today and we'll continue our promise series what we have been going through, and in this lecture today we'll be looking into some of the traps which which is related to promises, and maybe we have done that in past or we have been doing it. So we'll try to look into those, and when we'll build our concept and we'll get to know we should not repeat that any further. So that is the agenda what we'll be doing, and also we'll be looking promise chaining, multiple callbacks, all those things to start with. We'll go to traps or promises a bit later. First we'll again look into the basics like how we can create a promise and all. So just a quick recap, we have been doing it in other videos. So for creating a new promise, we can use promise constructor. It takes a callback, and in callback, and there should be two arguments, resolve and reject. Here we have given the resolve only. The first one is resolve, second one is reject. And here we have used the set timeout, and we are resolving the set timeout after 2 seconds, and this gets resolved to a value called hello world. Now the promise has been created and we have stored it in a variable called promise, and now we need to resolve it. So for resolving the promise, we can use then, or we could have used async await, but for using async await, as we have seen in our previous video, we need to have function. So we won't be doing that. We'll just use simply then. So as you can see here, I can just use then, and then again takes a callback, and this callback, in the callback the argument will be the value when the promise will get resolved, and we are just consoling the value. And if we run this, we'll get the hello world. So let me run this, and yes, we are getting the value hello world here. Let's say I resolve it in like differently. Maybe I resolve it many times. Then what will happen? The promise will get exhausted, or it will get completed once I resolve it once, and will no longer be able to resolve it again. So we'll seeing that. But I'll tell you, so if you have this promise, you can resolve it as many times as you want. You just have to use then, and in then you have to give the callback. And even it gets resolved, this first line, it will no interfere the promise, this promise object. It is just resolving this instance using then, and the next line also can resolve it, and another then can also resolve it. So all are resolving it. It's not changing the actual promise. It's up to us how many times we want to resolve a promise using then. So if I run this, actually all should get resolved, and we should get the values like hello world 1, 2 and 3. So let me run this and see what happens. And yeah, so we are getting 3 values, and that's nice what we were seeing, and we are getting exactly what we were discussing. So moving forward, so one thing we got to know here is that a promise can be resolved as many times as we can. So we can attach multiple callbacks to a single promise using then. So basically these are different callbacks, right? This is different callback, this is a different callback, but we are attaching it to the same promise using different then. So that is what we wanted to see here. Also similarly, we are resolving the promise, we can reject it as well. So for that, what we have to do is, in our previous example, if we just keep reject, resolve we have to anyhow take, because that's the first parameter, we can neglect it, or we could have just done this, underscore would have done, and the second is reject, and here we are rejecting it after 2 seconds. So if I run this now, so you will get a rejected value. So for rejected promise, we need to have catch block. So what we have already discussed this thing in our previous lecture, and I would say you people watch my previous lecture before coming to this video, and please watch the videos from beginning to the end, then only you will understand, because I have been discussing so many intricacies in between, which you may not able to recall it. If you will just skip it, you will just lose that particular thing, and it will be difficult for you when we'll do the questions. So I'm resolving this promise here, and the first thing I'm giving is callback, and the second thing also here I'm giving basically 2 callbacks I'm giving in then. I've already explained this before. So this is another way to handle the promise, that we can give 2 callback. The first is for the success, the fulfilled promise, and the second one is for the errored out or the rejected promise. So this is This is one of way, or we could have done like we could have just have this then block, and we could have chained the catch block like this. Uh, catch, and then here we could have just given a callback, and we could have got the error. So this is also correct, and this is also correct. Both is good. Okay, moving forward. Yeah, so let's run it once to see if it works fine or not. Yeah, after 2 seconds it got rejected, and this is because of our second callback. So for catching the errors, we need second callback in then, or we need a catch block in which should be chained to then, like this. And catch needs a callback. So I've been repeating this so many times in all of my videos. Hopefully you people will bear this in mind and will remember this. Okay, now moving forward. So the reject function what we have used here, it is used to trigger an error, what we have seen here. So, and we have already told you that we can use two functions. The second function will get called, means this second callback function will get called in case of we get any error. Now what we want to do is we want to do an exercise. I'll just comment this out. This was for your understanding of the promise, but now we'll try to see the some of the exercise we'll do. So the exercise here is we have to create a function job which must return a promise object. So we want a job function which returns a or which returns an object of promise. Okay, and it gets resolved after 2 seconds, and after 2 seconds with the value hello world. Okay, so we'll try. This is a very simple exercise. We'll just try to create it. So const job a arrow function, and it should return a promise. So I'll just do this callback, and then it should have resolve, reject. Okay, and what we want, yeah, we are returning a promise object. Yes, we are returning a promise object, and it should get resolved after 2 seconds. So we need a set time out, and set time out should get resolved after 2 seconds. So for that we need to call the resolve, and it should get called after 2 seconds, and the value should be hello world. Hello world. So this is the way we can do it. And since it's a single line thing, so we no need to have this curly braces here. And also we are returning this promise, and if from that job function we can just use the arrow functions expression where we no need to use curly braces, and we can just return it from here. So let's run it and see if we are successful in creating that. Okay, it's not printing anything because I'm not calling job. So I'll use console.log job. So it has basically returned the promise. So we need to do a then, and from here we need to do console.log data, and no need to print this promise because job is going to just return a promise. Now if we run this, it should print hello world, and yes, we are getting it. And one more thing, I have explained this before as well, that this resolve is a callback, and set time out, it takes an callback. So I have just given that here directly, and here it takes the timeout, and here it takes the value. So this is one way to write it, or else we could have written like this. We could have specifically given a callback, and resolve we should have called it with value hello world, and in the third parameter we can just remove it. That's not required right now, and even if we run it again, we'll get the same value. There should not be an issue. So this both of this thing is fine. Either you directly give resolve, because resolve is nothing but a callback, and this is the second parameter is timeout. The third parameter is what value it should return. So that's what, both are fine. So now this is one of the thing we have done for our exercise. This was pretty simpler to do, and we will be doing a harder exercise right now. And so what we are going to do is we have to create a job function which should return a promise, like we have done just right now. And what happens is our function here, our function will be given a parameter. So here, as we can see, this job function doesn't take any parameter, but our new function is going to have a parameter. And that parameter, if that parameter is not a number, then we need to return a promise, and we should reject that instantly and give the value as error. If our parameter is a odd number, then we should return a resolved promise which should get resolved after 1 second, and the value should be odd. And if data is a even number, then we should again return a promise which should get rejected after 2 seconds, and the value should be 2. Oh, sorry, value should be even. So that is what we are going to do. So first of all, we know, okay, we have to write a job function. So just write a function. Whenever you have to do some exercise, keep on doing the smaller things first, take baby steps, and then try to build your solution. So you needed a function, we have created a function. You know that it takes a parameter, so we'll just name it as p. It is taking a parameter. Okay, you know that you have to return a promise object in all of the cases. So you just write a promise, give it a callback like this, and here you give resolve and reject, because we need to have both of these. As the description says, we need to resolve sometimes and reject sometimes. Now the first thing was, if the parameter is not a number, so we need to check what is the parameter type. So if it is not a number, so we'll check. If it is not a number, then in that case we just need to reject it immediately with value called error. Okay, in second case, else if p is a even number, then we need to reject the promise after 2 seconds. So we'll use reject. We need to resolve it after 2 seconds or reject it after 2 seconds, and the value should be even. Okay, and in the third case, else if this is not is equal to 0, means it's a odd number, then again you have to use the set timeout for 1 second, but here you need to resolve the promise with the value called odd. That's what our requirement is. Okay, and now we need to call it. So we can have I'll just write, so we can call it like this. And if I run this here, so what I have done, I've called job with values in non-number, a even number, and a odd number, and I have resolved all of those. So in first case, I know that it's going to be rejected, so I have catch. I have catch in all of my uh, places. In all the places I have catch, but mostly in case of it's been odd, we are not rejecting it, so it will not end up in catch, maybe in this case, but in other cases it will end up in the catch. It will not end up in the success block. Okay, so now if we run this, we get value error, odd, and even. So we got error instantaneously because we are just rejecting it immediately from here. Oh, sorry, from here, and we got odd immediately, almost like before the even, because it's getting resolved after 1 second only. And if we see the second one, the even takes 2 seconds to be printed, so that is why we are seeing even at the end. We have called even thing before than the odd. This with odd, the odd value got called at the end, but the value of it got printed before, because its promise is getting rejected, or sorry, its promise is getting resolved only in 1 second. That is why we are getting this value before, and we are getting this printed before the even one. So I think it is clear. And moving to the next thing we want to see in our list. So multiple callback, we understood that how multiple callbacks work. To a single promise we can have multiple callbacks. Now we'll be looking into the promise chaining, like how promise chaining works. And so whatever we have studied will definitely help in the promise chaining thing. So let me just comment this out, and we'll have some of the examples to demonstrate the uh, chaining. So maybe I'll just create some functions, some maybe promises. Let me just create it. So I have created basically two functions. Both of the functions is returning a promise. We are not using reject, so we can just remove this reject from here. And I am calling job1, and job1 is returning a promise. We are storing it in a variable called promise. Now we need to have promise chaining. So what we can do, promise chaining means when we resolve a promise, we can chain another promise to it. So let's say I resolve this promise, and then one second, let me just write this, and then I again use then. So basically this is called chaining. One promise we are resolving, and then we have chained another promise to the first one, and similarly I can have a then again. So I am just putting the another thing in my chain, and this chain will continue. So that's what we can do. And to give you an example of the thing we have created, what I'm gonna do is I'll just call this promise. So basically this is like this, promise dot then, and this promise dot then is resolving our promise. And we have studied in our previous lectures that if from the then block we return something, it will get returned as a promise. Even if we don't return anything from it, then block itself returns something. And if we are not returning it, then it will get undefined, will get returned. Okay, and that we can see if we chain it another then to our previous then definitely we'll get some value in our new then. Not new then, but the then which have been chained to our previous then. But if we are returning specifically something from here, and if it's a value, let's say what I'm doing here, I'm just resolving the promise, I'm getting the value which we have been doing it so far, and now I'm calling another function job2, which calling job2 will give me a promise. We have been doing this before as well. Job2, when we call it, it returns a promise object. So basically we are returning another promise from here. Even if we return, if I do simply like this, return a value like this 12, so this 12, the value 12 will get returned as a promise with value 12. For that we need to use a then block, and in data 2 will get 12. Okay, so let's say I don't do this for now, and if I run this code, then what will see is data 1 will be actual data 1, and in data 1 we are returning this result of job 1. So this will be data 1 result of job 1, and here we'll be getting data 2 12, and here we'll be getting data 3 and hello world. So if I do this, data 1 result of 1 and 12, as I was seeing telling you that whatever, if a normal value also we will return from here, that will return as a promise. Okay, so but we don't have to do that. It was just for an explanation. We are calling a job2 function which is actually returning a promise, as we can see from here. So if we have to resolve that, then we have to use a then block like this. So this is nothing but a chaining. The promises are getting changed to each other. The first one after getting resolved will return a new promise, and for resolving that we have to chain a then like this. And then if something from here we are returning hello world from here. So for getting that value we need to use another then block here, which has been changed to the second one. And here also we are just consoling the value, we are not returning anything. Okay, and if I run this again, one second, let me clear the previous thing. If I run this again, we'll see the normal value data 1, data 2 and hello world. And if I just chain another promise here, oh sorry, another then block, and see what did I get here, data, and if I console it, console.log, and if I print data, it should be undefined because we are not returning anything, but then by default returns a promise. So we should get a promise, and this then block should get resolved to a value called undefined. And look, it's printing the value undefined. So that's what I was trying to make a point here, that then always returns a promise, irrespective whether you are returning something or not. If you are returning very good, whatever you are returning will become a value for that particular promise, and you can always get that using a chained then block. Okay, now we understood the promise chaining as well, and lot of things. All of the concept we have actually understood and discussed. Now we'll see what can be traps, what can be some issues which we can end up, which we shouldn't be doing, and how we can protect ourselves into not falling into those traps. So the first one is the broken chain. The first one is broken chain. What happens sometime will break our chain or promise, so, and which we don't want to. So let's see, I'm just pasting a code snippet. I'll just comment this out the previous one. Okay, and here if we see, I have this function called test. I'm calling this job function. So for job we need to have a, okay, I'll just create a job function. Maybe I'll just copy something from here. I'll copy this. This will become a job function for us here, because otherwise it will complain that there is no job here. Okay, so this is a job function here, and we are calling this job function. At the end we are getting a promise. We are trying to resolve it, and you can see that this is a promise, and here we are resolving it. And at the end of the resolve, inside that we are calling some callback called do something, and we are passing the data what we got as a resolved fulfilled value. And then at the end we are returning the promise. Like here we are returning. So basically this guy is not getting utilized. This guy is not getting utilized. We called job, we got the promise object, at the end we are returning it. And this guy, this, so this chain got broken and we are not utilizing it. Okay, so basically what thing I wanted to make a point from here is this thing, this is a promise chain and this got broken, we are not utilizing it. Instead, in this code what we have done, we have added a callback onto a promise. This is a callback to the promise, and we return a promise again. Problem is that we return the initial promise. We are returning the initial promise, not the result of promise dot then. If we would have returned the result of this promise dot then, something from here, as we know that promise dot then or any then block will return something. And if we do a specific return from here, then that is fine. Else it, we are just losing it. The result of promise dot then is a lost promise because no one can interact with it. This guy is returning a promise, right? Then always returns a promise, and that got lost because we are not returning it. If we write return here, that's fine. So what we could have done is, instead of doing calling this job like this and keeping the value in promise and returning at the end, we could have just called job like this, and we could have just returned it from here, and no need to return this specifically from the end. Otherwise, what happened in the meantime, in our earlier version, the job, this guy was getting lost. So now correcting, I'll just go back to our old thing. So here we are losing this promise dot then. This promise dot then is returning something, but we are then is returning something, but we are not utilizing that promise is getting lost. So for correcting that, we know we should do something like this. We should return the promise like this, and it should do our work. 1 second, this spelling is wrong, I believe. Okay, so fine. And also you should be beware that sometime you must break the chain. Like here our chain got broken, and we did not want it to get broken because we are not utilizing it, but sometime it will be required. For an example, maybe do something is an asynchronous task. This guy is an asynchronous task, but we don't want to slow the promise chain. Like we don't want to slow it, like we don't want to chain it. So then at the end what we want to do is we want it to be fast, so we'll just break it. We'll no longer chain the promise. So sometime we need to break the chain, but it's not always required. It depends upon the situation. And so we need to be careful while working with promises, that whether we should break the chain or whether we should not. And if we are breaking the chain, we should not be losing that promise as we were doing it here. This promise was getting lost. Now the second issue is the pyramid of doom, which we have seen before, that with callbacks we used to end up in pyramid of doom. One callback calling another, and every callback should know the next callback, and we have already discussed thing before. And people who doesn't have much knowledge on the promise, or they just have started and have been working with callbacks all this time, will attempt to write something like this. They will, what they'll do is they'll call job function. Job is returning a promise, they'll do dot then, and they'll tell, okay, when job gets finished, then I'll call job 2 inside that, and once job 2 get finished, then I'll call job 3 inside that. Once job 3 get finished, I'll do job 4 inside that, and everything finishes, then I'll do something. Then just understand this, that we are exactly doing the same thing what we were doing in the callback. Once the first callback finishes up, we call the next one inside the first callback. The third callback gets called in the second callback. So every callback should know the next callback. We are doing the same thing, but promise is meant to solve this problem. Promise is nothing. Promise is something which should solve this. It should not create this. So this is wrong. Either anyhow this will work fine as expected what you want, but this is not the way we have written is not as expected. This is pyramid of doom, and promise has come to eliminate this, not end up having the pyramid of doom. So this is wrong. What we could have done is, we could have, I'll just write it, we could have done something like this, calling this test function, call job, resolve it, from there from inside call job 2 and return it. It will get returned as a promise. Then chain it, then again chain it, then again chain it. It looks nicer, crispier, and this is flattened, and this is why the promise has come up. We should not do this. So this is one of the mistake which every beginner does, so we should not be doing it. The third thing is, what happens sometime, the uh, we should always return a promise if we are working with promises. So there should not be a case where in one of the scenario you are returning a promise, another scenario you are not returning a promise. That will be wrong. So let's say if I give you an example, so let's say, okay, let me write it. Let's say you have this job and you are testing some condition, and if it is true, you are returning a promise. If it is false, you are returning a number. Now if you call this job function, you expect this to be promise every time, right? Because you know that job should return a promise, so this result will be promise always. Now, but what happens here, you are returning a promise sometimes but a number. Then for to tackle the situation, you have to have some conditions, like whether the job, this guy is a object or not, and then job dot then is a function or not, then do this and then do that. So this will be very cumbersome, like dealing with this is not manageable. This is something which is not acceptable. As a rule of thumb, whenever a function can return a promise, if it is returning a promise from here, it should always return a promise irrespective of what the value is. Otherwise we'll have this ugly code. This is very ugly, because here we have to check whether it's an object or not, whether it's a value. Like, okay, this guy, if it passes this thing, then that means it's a promise, then we'll resolve it. And if it doesn't pass, then we'll, okay, it's a number. This is very ugly. It should always return a promise. So now the question will be there in your mind, then what can we do for the normal values? So you should know that there is something called promise dot resolve, and which will help you here. So what happens with promise dot resolve, that auto promises, sorry, promise dot resolve, and here you can give a value. So what happens, this is a auto resolve promise with a simple value. Here you want to return a simple value, return it, and it's getting resolved as well, but it will get resolved as a promise. So you can use, if you end up in this scenarios, use promise dot resolve. It will definitely help you. So now if I change my thing, so what I could have done is, I could have done something like this: return a auto resolve promise with value 42 in the data. Okay, so, and also if we want to auto reject a promise, we can use promise dot reject. Promise dot reject is for rejecting, auto rejecting something. This guy will help in that case. Okay, and the last thing which I want to call it, like which we another trap, I would say, that you call a method, or maybe I'll just name it as forgotten promise. Forgotten promise. This is very similar to the lost promise initially what we have discussed. So I'll just write an example. So here I think there is some issue here. What is it? Okay, okay, here the equal to should come here. Okay, so here what we are doing, job we know returns a promise, this let promise is equal, this is fine, no issues in that. Now we are returning our own promise, we are returning our own promise, and job itself returns a promise. And what we are doing here is we are trying to, we are resolving the promise, seeing whether okay this ends up in success or this ends up in result. If it is ending up in success, we are resolving it, and if it is ending up in error or it is unsuccessful, we are rejecting it. No need to do that, because why we have created this promise, new promise, it's not required, no, because this guy is already a promise, this guy is already a promise, we no need to do this. This is a lot of pointless code is there, we can fix it using very simple thing. We should not just create our thing, our what do you say, our code, sorry, our promise. Just we can write, we can utilize the promise which is already there with the job, and if it is a successful, then just do something whatever we want to do, and if it is a reject value, it will get returned. No issues in that. Whoever is calling test function, it will get a rejected promise and they will take care of it. We no need to do this reject and resolve specifically. That was a lot of unnecessary code. So we should always be beware that where we should be creating our promise, we should not be creating extra promises. So that is what the something. So now we have covered a lot of things. Trap of promises also we have covered, and we'll just comment out all of this code what we have written here, because that's not needed, and we will have some questions. For that we need to guess the outputs. So theory we have completed, we have discussed the multiple callbacks to a single promise, then how we can chain the promises, and we like chaining promises will help and will not end up in pyramid of doom, and then traps of promises at the end. Some of the output questions where we have to predict the outputs. Okay, and so I'll just write those questions here and you need to predict the output. So the first question is this one. So we have a job which is returning a promise, and it's getting reject immediately, it's not required, we can just have underscore here. And what we are doing, yeah, we are having multiple callbacks here. Again, we have already discussed this thing, it should be easy for you now to pick. So what we are doing, we are consoling. If we know that this promise is getting rejected, so definitely will not end up in this, then will not end up in this, then will not end up in this, and will directly come to this catch. So we'll see this error one for sure, because this is definitely there. And as I was telling you that then always returns a promise, catch also returns a promise. So this guy will also return a promise from here. So since it's also returning a promise, so we have this chained then here, so we'll end up in this then, because after this catch we have another promise, and for that we have this then, so we'll come inside this block as well. So we'll get this success 4 as well. So error 1 is getting printed because it is rejected, and since catch itself returns a promise, we'll end up in this then, and we'll print this success 4 as well. So we'll just print the value, this got weird, and if I print it, error 1 and success 4, nice. So we saw that we are getting the values as expected, and this is an example of promise, multiple promise which have been chained. Okay, so now our whatever we have discussed is helping in our solving our questions, right? And hopefully you people will also feel confident and will able to solve a lot of questions. So our next question is this one. We have a function called job, it returns a promise, but here it's checking something. Job, if it is a true value, then it returns success, it is a false, it returns error. Now job is being called with true, so definitely first thing it will end up with success and it will get resolved. So this promise have this, then immediately it will come inside this, that is for sure. So it will print the success, so success will be printed for sure. I'll just write success, and here job, we are calling job with false and we are returning it. Calling job with false will print error, and this will go inside this catch block. So we'll see the error, and after this we are returning a error code from here. This will print this error, okay, and then we are returning something. So you know That from catch block, if you'll return something, this will get printed, this will get returned as a promise, and it will have a value called error code. And this is a normal promise, so this will come inside this then block. Something which is getting returned from catch doesn't mean it's a error, it's a normal promise. So we'll end up here and it will print this data. So data will be nothing but error caught. Okay, error caught, fine. And sorry, this one, and then it's calling this job again. Oh sorry, where were we? We were in, we have returned error code from here. It has printed this error code, and then it calls job with true value, job calls with true value, and when job get call, it returns a promise, it returns a promise which should be a successful promise. And here after this we are not having any then block, we are having catch block. So this is a successful promise. This job with value true getting called will return us a promise which will get resolved, but there is no then block here, so we'll lose that. That promise will get unhandled. We have catch, if we would have got error, we have catch for that, but there is no then, so we'll not get the value. Otherwise we would have got this success again. So if I run this, sorry for my spelling mistake, and if I run this, so we should get success, error, and error code. Three things: success, error, error code. Yeah, it's working as expected. Good that our expertise on promises is helping us. Moving to the next one, we have the next question is, let me just write it down. The next question is going to be a little bigger. Okay, and I will just clear my console. That's not okay. This job, this particular function is again doing the same thing: success, error, and this is also getting called with true. So I'll keep writing what should it be printing. So it will definitely go in here and it will print success. The first thing it will print is success, then comma, it calls job again with true. So true means it will be a successful promise, so it will come here. If data is not is equal to victory, that is true, because data will be success, data will be success. So success is not is equal to victory, so we are throwing an error, we are throwing an error called defeat. So defeat is getting thrown. So, and here we are not printing anything, so nothing will get printed here, and it's getting rejected, it's getting thrown from here only. So this guy will not get encountered because we just came out of this then, and we'll look for next catch. So next catch is this, what we'll see, we'll see defeat. So we'll write the defeat here, we'll write defeat. So we just have to take baby steps at once and go to the next. So this is defeat that have been caught by this, we have printed defeat here, and then we are calling the job with false value, and we know if we call job with false value, we get the value as error. If I am not wrong, we get the value as error, we get the value as error, and that will be from this guy. Okay, from this guy. So for the next catch, it will come here, it will print error, it will be printing error, and it will return error caught. So first I'll write the values of previous value error, and the next thing it will print is error caught. We have to see actually that should get printed or not. From here we have returned error caught, but for that, so we are just returning it. So that's a not a resolve, sorry, that's not a reject, that's a resolve. So that should end up here. We are printing, yeah, we are printing the value, then we should get the error caught, and then from here we are rejecting it. Basically we are throwing an error with having value test, so it will come in this catch block, and this catch block we are printing this error with having value called data.message. So I think data.message will be nothing but this test. So what we'll see next is, we'll see error, and the value would be, let me just see what we have, value would be test, because we have sent the test. So this should be the output. We are just following the concept, and we should get the value as it is. We are just running it. We got success, defeat, error, error caught, success, and text. So that means that our thing is working fine. So this is what we expected, and so I think we have covered most of the concept, and this is all related to what we have discussed. And if you get something in your interviews, you'll be able to answer most of the questions. Also, we can see last thing before going, that is promise.all. I have already explained promise.all in one of the video, and we have implemented the polyfill for that as well. But again, we'll look into that and we'll have one question with promise.all. So promise.all basically returns a promise, and the the value what it returns is an array containing the data of each of the given promises. And promise is resolved when all of the given promises are resolved. So promise.all will only get resolved if all the containing promises will get resolved. If any of the promise get failed, then it will just get rejected with the error message. You will not get any value. I've already explained this, and this is nothing but a fail fast behavior. And if a given promise is rejected, the resulting promise of promise.all will be rejected at the exact moment when the promise got rejected, and it will not wait for other promises to complete, because it saw one of the promise getting rejected, so there is no point checking for others. It will just return with a error. It will not give you any value. Even if you have some of the promises as a successful one, even those value will not get, because something got failed. So it is just concerned about that. It will tell you any failure. So that we have already discussed in that lecture. I'm not going to elaborate that here, but we'll just see one of the question uh, based on that. So let me just have it here. So we have 5 promise created, and I have put all the promises in an array and pass it in promise.all, because promise.all takes an array of promises, and then when we resolve the promise.all promise, we get this data object, and this data will be an array. That is why we are looping through it and we are printing the value. And if we any of this get rejected, because here we can see that p4 got rejected, so will not end up here, because even a single failure means will end up in catch with the message, error message. So let me just first clear this console, and if I try to run this, will end up in catch with this error. In reject, what error we are sending? P4. So we'll see this error P4. We are printing error, and what the message, that is error P4. That is what we are getting, right? So we couldn't access the result of other promises, because other promises, as you can see, we have rejected P4 after 300 millisecond, right? And yeah, we have rejected it immediately. Other promises which are getting resolved after 300 millisecond. But even if something we have resolved it before, if something we would have resolved, let's say 100 millisecond, even we would not have got the value for that, because even we got a single successful promise or double successful promise result. But since we got one failure, we are not sending the values even for the successful ones. But let's say we want to have values and we want to use this promise.all, then what we'll do? So in those cases, what we can do is we can use a self auto resolve promises. So I'll tell you what we can do. What we'll do is we'll not give the promises directly. Like here, we are giving the promises directly, right? We'll not give promises directly to promise.all. Instead, we'll give the result of the promises.catch. So the promises.catch is the auto resolved promise, right? So promise.all will not stop, because even if error happens, we have catch for that. It will handle it, and finally we'll get a value. And promise.all will, since promise.all will not get an error, we have already assigned a catch to the promise. I'll tell you what I'm saying. It's difficult to get it from what I'm just saying. If I write it, then it become easy for you. So if I do this, in P1 I have assigned a catch block, similarly for P2, similarly for P3, similarly for P4 and P5. So we are giving result of every promises dot catch. We are giving result of that. So this is nothing but this guy is nothing but this is a auto resolved promise. This is getting resolved automatically, and then it's getting returned. So promise.all will not stop. Promise.all will only stop if it gets a rejected promise. It will not get a rejected promise, because we are handling the rejection. We have handled the rejection and we are sending it. The after handling the rejection, we are returning the promise. So in this case, however, what will happen whenever something gets failed? So in our case, P4 was getting failed, right? So we'll not get any value for P4, but yeah, for others we'll get the values. So we'll have to test the received data, like we have this data we got, we have to print it and test it if something is failed or not, because we have written it in a way that promise.all will not able to catch the error, and we are going to get the values for sure. Now it will up to us to check for errors. So if I run this now, so you should get the values P1, P2, P3. P4 you did not get because it was an error, so there is undefined. So we will get to know, okay, if something is undefined means some error has happened for that particular promise. So this was it. We have, this was also an important thing to discuss. So we have covered everything about the promises. We have polyfills uh, for each of the promise methods, and maybe if possible I'll try to create a polyfill for promise, which is generally not been asked in interviews so much, so that is why I'm not covered that, but maybe in future I'll cover that. But for now we have covered every aspect of promises, and hopefully it will definitely help you in solving questions or promises, and also in your coding work. Whenever you do development, you will be a better developer. It's not always what we study is only for interview, but we should also build our concept so that we become a good developer. And guys, please subscribe to my channel. You people are coming to the channel viewing the videos, but you're not subscribing it, and I'll ask again, you please spread the word about my channel, and ask your friends and family to subscribe it so that they can also get benefit out of it. And if you like this video, please press the like button, and we shall meet in the next video. For till then, bye guys.